To report on urban agriculture from the international perspective, please welcome coordinator of the Milan Pact Awards, Tom Forster.
Hello, everyone, and I'm very, very, very happy to be here with you. This stage and the hosting by the George Washington University was where I stood almost 2 years ago. I think it was 1.5 to 2 years ago when there was a food tank event here. And at that time, the story of the Milan Pact, which I'm going to tell you here, was just, we were at the front end of what's been a 1.5 year journey. And I am happy to and excited to tell you about this because I think that there is a powerful and relatively silent revolution occurring. The Milan Pact story is not one story, it's actually, as of today, 130 stories. And it's growing every few weeks by a few more cities that sign the Milan Pact. I'm going to tell you where this came from, what was the context, how did it happen, and what's in it? Why is it of value? What's the next steps? What are the next steps? And why does it matter for us here in the US? Sometimes the international arena, it feels like a foreign territory to most actors and activists in the food world who have so much to struggle with at home and in their neighborhoods and cities. And if they get to the national stage, that's pretty amazing. And as we all know, urban interest in the Farm Bill is a relatively new thing. And up until recently, it was the food safety net that got the urban congressional vote, Title IV only. And I used to stand in lines on Capitol Hill in Farm Bill hearings and found that there were people in line who had no idea about the issues that others in the line were there for. And the Farm Bill is a big animal, and having urban issues represented in other than the food safety net is not only new, but it's needed, and I think the Urban Ag Act is a great example of the national policy pickup that is needed from local levels of action at states and cities around the country. What I want to tell you, though, today is about how this isn't just a U.S. phenomenon, and how it's really not the U.S. that is the innovator on all the various many levels that we heard in the introductions that urban food systems are about. So one of the things that I think is really important that comes from the opening statements is that urban food systems that do not exist in a vacuum of urban jurisdiction. And that's very important for the politics of for the future of urban agriculture at a production level, but also at the system level. And you heard about the food systems, and UDC is doing amazing work to mount a university-led, a land-grant college-led urban food systems platform and framework, and it's very, very exciting that it's in the nation's capital. So the Milan Pact is a demonstration of the combination of technical expertise that is rooted in groundwork in urban and near. You heard the word peri-urban in near rural, peri-urban, rural, and also urban food systems change work. And as you all know, here and also in the world, most of that work has not been the work of government, right? And it's coming around to be the work of government, and it's actually a very important pivot, because what we heard about also in the introduction, the scaling up and the scaling out, and those are two different vectors. Scaling out is the horizontal learning from community to community, city to city, state to state, county to county. The scaling up is the vertical alignment between urban policies, state policies, and national policies, and increasingly important, the international, which we haven't paid as much attention to, on development policy in work in the U.S. Why is that important today? I'll come to this at the end of the 15 minutes I have. There is a whole new development agenda for the world that is remarkably about the whole world together. The World Bank retired the use of developed and developing nations just a little while ago. And that's partly because a very intense 2 years of negotiation has yielded a set of sustainable development goals, 17 with 169 targets that are universal. And within those targets, a first ever goal 11 on the future of sustainable cities. And goal 2, which is a carryover from the Millennium Development Goals, ending hunger, improving nutrition, and sustainable agriculture, is not well linked to goal 11. So I'll come back to that again. Our government now is taking the SDG framework seriously, but it's really not very well known in the public. The media has not really covered it. But there's something else which is around the corner that I'll get to later, and that is a global new urban agenda, which will be launched in 3 weeks. So backing up from that, the Milan Pact story is really a story about, as I said, political will joined up with technical capacity. And in the fall of 2014, the city of Milan then, and for the following year and a half, had a mayor very much like the current mayor politically of New York City, de Blasio. His name was Pisapia. Mayor Pisapia, who's a friend of the current mayor of New York, went to a meeting of the C40 leadership group. The C40 is a group of mega cities who have had a very profound impact on climate negotiations. And now the former mayor of the city of New York, Mike Bloomberg, is leading that C40 leadership group. And at this meeting of, I'm sure, more than 40 cities now, it's probably like the G77, a lot more than 40. There, he said, who amongst you would like to join me in the development of a food pact, an urban food policy pact? 26 cities threw in their hats and said, well, we'll join you, Mayor Pisapia. So then the city Office of International Relations, who had absolutely no understanding of anything related to agriculture, anything related to food or food policy, said, oh my God, what are we going to do? So they actually got resources through the EU Commission, European Union Commission, and they put out a bid for technical support. And it was your customary RFP for expert consultants that could have been hired out of a university. And I do work in a university, and I am a consultant, but I also knew that there were practitioner experts, and this is really important for our work. Practitioner expertise and university expertise and policymakers, staff, and especially, and the champions need to really work together on this. This is a big area of work. And so this technical team that I put together eventually had 10 individuals in a variety of organizations that included UN agencies, longtime NGOs that have worked in urban and peri-urban food production, called the RUAF Foundation in the Netherlands, that has worked all over the world for many, many years, decades. And individuals who have worked in the newly breaking out area of integrated urban-rural development, integrated urban-rural planning. Now, in the new urban agenda called, and you can Google the new urban agenda while you're here and you'll see it. It's 23 pages long. It's just been negotiated painfully in New York after 2 years. In integrated territorial urban and territorial development is the new handle in international discourse for bringing the urban and rural actors together. But how? How is this done? And what's important about the Milan Pact story is this is a story about first one mayor talking to 26 mayors, that by the time the technical team was in a participatory way working with the focal points of these cities, it was 46 cities. And so by the spring, March, April, May of 2015, last year, the drafting process took place. And let me tell you what's in this pact, which by October, not even a year ago, in Milan, 108 cities sent mayors and representatives of their cities to sign the pact. Actually, very much the same technology we're using today. It was the first time an international treaty document was signed live and instantly on iPads in a room, amazing room, which you'll see if you go to this website, Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. You'll see this wonderful hall that was bombed during the Second World War, but not completely restored. A Renaissance piazza space. It was just an amazing old place with really good technology. And so 108 cities signed it on October 15th. The next day was World Food Day, and a very clever use of the Milan Expo. Everybody here know what the Milan Expo was? No? Milan Expo was the first global exposition in the long history of global expos with country pavilions to put food as the theme, right? And appropriate that it be Italy. And there are a number of Milan blanks. There's the Milan Expo, there's the Milan Charter, which people in the US know a little bit more about, that Baria Foundation pushed forward, and the Italian government. That's a national food charter, food policy charter. There's the Milano Group, which is a very high-level institutional circle pushing for the inclusion of sustainable food systems in sustainable development. And then there's the Milan Pact, which is the least well-known. That's why I call it a quiet revolution. A pact of mayors that now numbers almost 130, that's coming together in 2 weeks at the time of the World Food Day celebration in Rome, in a new mayor's summit, just before some very, very important events on the future of cities and city systems at the planetary level. So what's in the pact? The pact is 3 parts. You have a preamble that I'm going to just shift to my notes for a minute here to be accurate, even though this was something I lived with for a year. It's dense and involves a lot. So the Pact's preamble lays out that cities have a strategic role in sustainable food systems. They don't say in urban food systems, sustainable food systems, very important. That current food systems are challenged. That family farmers and smallholder farmers are key. That the private sector and civil society have important roles to play. That cities already have to comply with global commitments, and there should be something around food systems. New. The agreement itself is 1 page, and that's what you get electeds to read in a day. So 1 page commits cities to develop sustainable food systems, to encourage coordination at all levels within their cities, city departments and agencies, to seek coherence at national and international levels with their city food system, food policies and practices, to engage all sectors in food policy, to review and amend current city policies, and to use the framework for action to further develop their food policy and practice portfolio in their cities. Now, the last thing is that they will also encourage other cities to join. So there's been a spreading of the pact globally. Mayor to mayor, though. That's why it's somewhat silent. And the big media haven't really picked this up. So what's in the framework for action, which is really the meat and potatoes, or the kale and the onions of the Milan Pact? Well, I'm not going to go into details because I don't have time, but there are 37 provisions taken from what's going on in cities all over the world that are in 6 categories. Categories are governance and an enabling environment, sustainable diets and nutrition, food supply and distribution, social and economic equity, very, very important at the global as well as in most cities, and management and recovery of food waste. So those 6 categories, 37 provisions in them, and then at the very last minute, literally, a very well-known Italian publisher, Feltrinelli Foundation, published an ebook of good practices. So you'll see many more practices of cities. Now, I'm going to cant to what's next. The building on this political will is only begun. And what I don't have time to go into is how incredibly the elements of the Milan Pact are embedded in the new urban agenda, which is going to be launched in Quito, Ecuador, in the week of October 17 to 20. And the food and nutrition elements in this are actually everything activists and others have wanted for 20 plus years in a global new urban agenda for food, nutrition, and agriculture. The story of how that happened is another story for another time. But I just want to bring this back to the New Urban Act and to this work in the capital of the US, that lining up the vertical dimension here is really what is needed, and it's a great example, and I hope we all will take it to the next step. Thank you.